Hello there. A lot of writers feel really uncomfortable about pitching their stories. I do too, to some extent as well. Let's go this way. Thank you. And so here's a way to make it even easier. It's important to pitch our stories in two ways. A, when we're first developing a story, and B, when we want to see if there's producers out there that might be interested in our story. So the first thing is when we're coming up with a new story, um, Blake Snyder suggested you build it into a log line and then you go up to somebody in Starbucks and you pitch your story, right? And that's great, but it feels really scary for most writers. If it doesn't feel scary for you and you could do that, that's it's not a bad way to get feedback and see how it lands. Um, but it's also a bit problematic, right? Because you're probably nervous on some level unless you're a super extrovert. Um, and they are also nervous because you're nervous, or even if you're not, they're like, yeah, but what if I think your story's bad? So they'll probably be polite, go, oh, that's kind of good or whatever, right? If they really like it, you'll see the response that they're excited. But like, there's a lot of pressure, right? There's a lot of pressure. So what if you end up pitching your story without pitching it, in a sense? What if you go to your comparables and you just ask their thoughts on those comparables and then organically get to a pitch if it even makes sense for that person, because maybe they don't like your comparables. For example, the last screenplay that I wrote, and now is an Oscar-winning producer attached to, if I were to be pitching that in the early stages, if I was just writing, going, I think I'm going to do something, I might have a conversation with anybody, a stranger or whatever, and say, hey, would you ever see that movie Hoosiers? What'd you think of it? And then they start thinking about, well, oh, I liked it, or I didn't like it. I don't like basketball. I do like basketball. I love Gene Hackman. I don't. I love this part of it. I love that part of it. And now we're just in conversation talking about a movie, right? And then I go, I could, or I could talk about, well, you ever see the original Bad News Bears? Um, would you, actually, I saw that recently again. I think it really holds up. Have you seen it? Blah, blah, blah. We could talk about that. Do you like it? Do you not like it? Blah, 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 blah. How about that movie, Blue Valentine? The Ryan Gosling movie. It's sort of a gritty drama about this marriage breaking up. One of my favorite movies of that year. What do you think about that? What if, what if, what if you saw a sports story that kind of had the tone of Blue Valentine, that had the intensity of that? Is that something that you'd be sort of interested in or whatever? But I'm just in a conversation, right? And then one other comparable for that story is Dead Poet Society. In a sense, a group of young people get influenced by a mentor who comes in, riles them up, tragedy happens, and then they still salute their mentor. Like, what do you think of Dead Poet Society? What that pattern, right? But in that conversation, I could basically get a feel for if this person, if they, and then once we had that conversation, if they're like excited about the elements of those other movies that I'm excited about, then I might say, you know what? Because I'm thinking about this new story that's about this troubled youth soccer team in Ohio, and and this kid who's new to that town that's missing his father, and then there's this black British uh, soccer player whose career ended in scandal, who happens to be hanging out, sort of licking his wounds in Ohio, where his wife grew up in her hometown. And when he stumbles across this troubled youth soccer team, even though he was, sort of at the highest level of the game, and it's a very embarrassing sort of thing to coach a youth team in the states. He kind of stumbles onto it and then finds a deeper calling for himself, and then takes the kids in sort of a direction that kind of riles them up, and a tragedy happens, but then they still end up coming together in the end. So I kind of ended up pitching it, but it was after I kind of felt out how things were, right? Um, so that's a way of sort of pitching your story without pitching it. And you can also, it's super helpful in the very beginning when you're saying, should I even write this thing in at all? You might have a log line in your mind or whatever, but just start talking about the elements of the comparables that speak to you. On the other side, once this thing is completely finished and you're out there meeting producers or studio execs or anybody who might be in a position to be looking for this sort of material, or somebody who knows somebody that might be looking, play the same game. Hey, have you ever seen Hoosiers? What'd you think? What'd you think of that Hoosiers movie? Oh, how come you didn't see it? How come you didn't watch that? Do you not like sports movies? Are there any sports movies you liked? but now you're just having a conversation about movies, right? And then if you find, then you're able to very organically find the heat if it's there, or realize, oh, this person, even though they're such and such producer and they've even got these credits for this other thing, they're not into it. They might be like, the first thing out of their mouth might be like, I love sports movies, but nobody's buying them. I would never do one again. Now, the last thing you're going to do is pitch your sports movie to this person, right? You go, wow, that's awesome, interesting. How come you think people aren't doing it? You think that there's never going to be a market for sports movies again? But now you're just in a conversation. Much more pleasant for you and more pleasant for the other person, right? Cool. Hope that tip helps. If you want one resource to move yourself forward in your screenwriting career one step, there's a link somewhere around this video. You can click on the link. It takes you through this little type form. You get to have a little sort of conversation, just find out where you are on your journey, meets you where you are, and I might have a resource for you that's helpful. Thanks. Have a great day.